At 6:41 a.m., Marin Sloane stood in her apartment kitchen, watching her espresso drip like it had all the time in the world, while her inbox started acting like it didn't know her. The subject line hit first. Access change confirmation. Not a question, not a request. A confirmation. She clicked. Her screen blinked, loaded, and delivered the kind of sentence that turns the blood cold without raising the temperature. Her access to the risk ledger had been modified. Modified meant removed. Modified meant someone had done it carefully enough to sound polite about it. Marin Sloane didn't panic. Not yet. She'd spent 3 years learning the shape of corporate harm, how it never announces itself with violence, how it arrives with clean fonts and harmless verbs. She opened the company dashboard and tried again. Denied. She tried the backdoor method, her own internal audit link, the one she personally coded with the kind of redundancy you build when you don't trust people. Denied. At 6:44 a.m., Marin Sloane scrolled down the confirmation email and found the approving name, Calvin Rusk, Director of Trust and Compliance. Her boss. The man who loved the word trust so much he put it in his title like a priest stitching holiness into his robe. Marin stared at the line long enough to see what it really was. A signature on her disappearance. She wasn't surprised Calvin would do something like this. She was surprised he would do it on a Tuesday. Because Tuesday was audit prep day. Tuesday was sacred. Tuesday was when the company pretended it had nothing to hide. And Marin Sloane had been preparing something all month, a report that wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't revenge. Just truth. A quiet document showing that the company's new approval engine was denying loans in a pattern that looked like discrimination, wearing a tie. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was worse. It was profitable. At 7:12 a.m., Marin Sloane stepped into the building's lobby, and the security gate didn't greet her the way it always did. Usually, her badge opened the world like a small, obedient miracle. Today, it beeped once, sharp, offended, and the light turned red. The guard behind the desk didn't even look up right away, like she was a notification he could swipe away. She tried again. Red. The guard finally raised his eyes. His expression wasn't cruel. It was rehearsed. Sorry. It says you need to check in with HR. Why? Marin Sloane asked, and kept her voice steady, like this was an innocent inconvenience. He shrugged, in a way that suggested he'd been trained to shrug. Not sure. It's just what it says. At 7:14 a.m., Marin stood slightly off to the side as employees streamed past her, people with earbuds, people with smoothie cups, people with the relaxed faces of those who had never been deleted. She opened Slack on her phone. Her workspace loaded, then disappeared. A blank login screen. No channels, no history, no identity. It felt intimate. The way a company can erase you without touching you. It felt like being ghosted by a building. She called Calvin. It rang. Once, twice. Then went to voicemail. The kind of voicemail that sounds expensive. Hey, you've reached Calvin. If this is urgent, you know what to do. Marin Sloane whispered. I did know what to do. And she hung up. She called HR. A calm woman answered with a calm name and a calm voice. The kind of calm that exists to make you feel crazy for having feelings. Hi. This is Dana in People Operations. Hi, Dana. Marin Sloane said. My badge isn't working. My system access is gone. I'm in the lobby. A pause. A soft click of keys. Then Dana said, Yes, I see it. We're expecting you. Can you come up to the 4th floor, conference room B? Am I fired? Marin asked, because clarity was the only form of dignity left. Dana's voice stayed smooth. We'll explain everything when you get here. At 7:19 a.m., Marin Sloane took the elevator up without a badge because the guard had granted her a temporary visitor pass like she was a guest in her own life. The elevator walls reflected her back at her. Neat blazer, clean hair, neutral lipstick, a woman who looked like she belonged in any room. And still, the company had decided she didn't. Conference room B had frosted glass and a long table that didn't forgive mistakes. Inside, 3 people waited. Dana from HR, a legal counsel Marin had seen in executive meetings, and Calvin Rusk. He stood when she entered, as if he was hosting a polite dinner, not a career execution. Marin, he said warmly, like he was glad she made it. At 7:21 a.m., Marin Sloan sat down because standing felt like begging. Dana folded her hands. Thank you for coming up, Marin. Calvin leaned forward slightly. His eyes held a practiced sadness, the kind that makes other people feel guilty for being wronged. We're going to talk about a serious issue, he said. Marin Sloan didn't blink. Okay. The legal counsel slid a folder across the table. We have evidence of unauthorized data extraction. Marin stared at the folder. From me? Calvin hid, as if this hurt him. Yes, he said. From your account, Dana added softly. It appears you exported sensitive model evaluation results to a personal device. That sentence was designed like a trap. If she denied it, she sounded defensive. If she asked for details, she sounded guilty. If she explained, she sounded unstable. Marin Sloan did none of those. She asked one clean question. At what time? She said. Calvin's smile flickered just slightly, like a light losing power. The legal counsel opened the folder and read off a line. Yesterday, at 9:47 p.m. Marin Sloan nodded slowly, as if she was taking notes in a class she didn't choose. Then she said, That's interesting. Dana blinked. Why? Because at 9:47 p.m., Marin had been in a rideshare, crossing the Aurora Bridge. Phone dead, hands visible, watching rain crawl down the window like it was trying to escape. Because at 9:47 p.m., her laptop had been closed at home. Because at 9:47 p.m., she hadn't even been logged in. But truth didn't matter if someone had already built a better story. Marin Sloan said, Can I see the system log for that extraction? Calvin's voice stayed gentle. We can't share internal logs during an investigation. Then can I have the evidence you're using to accuse me? Marin asked. The legal counsel said, This is standard procedure, Calvin added. We're trying to protect the company. There it was. Not protect fairness. Not protect the team. Not protect the truth. Protect the company. Marin Sloan looked at Calvin carefully, like he was a document, and she was searching for the hidden clause. Is this about my report? She asked. Calvin's face softened into performance. What report? He said. At 7:26 a.m., Marin Sloan felt something inside her become very quiet. Because that question wasn't confusion. That question was the blade. What report? Meant. It's already gone. What report? Meant. You no longer have proof you ever wrote it. What report? Meant. If you keep pushing, you'll be pushing air. She turned her gaze to Dana. Dana, Marin said, calm and clear, can you confirm whether my access was removed before or after you scheduled this meeting? Dana hesitated. Not long. Just long enough, Calvin answered for her. We removed access as soon as we had cause. And who decided cause existed? Marin Sloan asked. Calvin didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. In this room, Calvin was the weather. He was the season. He was the reason the leaves fell. Dana said quietly, The decision came from your director. Marin Sloan nodded once. Then she opened her phone and tapped the screen twice. Calvin's eyes moved just a fraction toward her device. That was the first real emotion he showed. Interest. Concern. Because Marin wasn't supposed to be calm. She wasn't supposed to have a plan. She was supposed to be frightened enough to surrender. Marin Sloan looked back up. Am I being terminated? She asked. Dana's throat tightened. We're placing you on administrative leave pending investigation. Calvin leaned in like a mentor. Marin, he said. If you cooperate, this can go easier. Marin let the words hang for a beat. Then she said, I am cooperating. I'm asking for facts. Calvin's smile returned, thinner now. You've always been intense about facts, he said, like it was a personality flaw. That intensity can make people uncomfortable. Marin Sloan almost laughed, because that was the oldest trick in corporate history. When a woman brings evidence, call her difficult. When a man brings evidence, call him leadership. At 7:32 a.m., Dana stood and handed Marin a printed notice. Administrative leave. No system access. No contact with employees. A gag order dressed as policy. Calvin stood too. He offered his hand like this was closure, like this was mutual respect, like he hadn't just tried to bury her alive. Marin Sloan looked at his hand, then at his eyes, and she did something that Calvin didn't understand yet. She smiled. Not sweet. Not bitter. Just precise. Because at 7:33 a.m., Maren Sloan realized she didn't need the risk ledger anymore. She had built it. She knew where it breathed. She knew where it hid its heartbeat. And, most importantly, she knew Calvin never truly understood the system he used to erase her. He only understood the buttons. Maren Sloan stood up, took the notice, and walked out with the visitor badge still clipped to her blazer like an insult. At 7:38 a.m., she reached the elevator and pressed the button. The door slid open. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed once, soft, private. A text message from an unknown number. 2 lines. No greeting. No signature. Just a warning written like a confession. Stop digging, or we'll make you the story. Maren Sloan stared at the message, then locked her screen. Her reflection returned in the elevator. Mirror steady, composed. The doors closed. And somewhere above her, in the glass conference room, Calvin Rusk probably exhaled like a man who believed he'd won. He hadn't. He had just taught Maren Sloan what kind of war this was. Not a loud war. A quiet one. The kind where the cleanest revenge is the one that looks like compliance. And the first step was to let them think she was gone. Here's the quiet truth. In corporate life, you're rarely attacked loudly. You're erased politely. And the people who survive are the ones who prepare before they're targeted. At 8:06 a.m., Maren Sloan sat in her car 2 blocks away from the building, hands resting on the steering wheel, like she was holding the last calm thing left in her life. She didn't go home. Going home was what panicked people did. Maren Sloan wasn't panicked. She was rearranging reality. Her phone was still warm from that text, "Stop digging," like a thumbprint on glass. The kind of message that wasn't meant to scare you with volume. It was meant to scare you with certainty. She opened notes and typed 3 words. Prove the time. Because Calvin's story had one weak point. He'd picked a timestamp. And timestamps were either truth or the easiest lie to collapse. At 8:09 a.m., Maren Sloan called the one person at the company who didn't owe Calvin anything. Not a friend. Not a hero. Just someone who cared more about systems than politics. Quinn Mercer. Infrastructure engineer. Night shift fixer. The kind of man who treated servers like living things and people like unpredictable weather. He answered on the second ring, voice low and cautious. "Who is this?" "It's Maren Sloan," she said. "You probably can't say my name out loud right now." A pause. Then he exhaled, like he'd been waiting for the other shoe all morning. "I heard," Quinn said. "They scrubbed you from Slack." "They scrubbed me from more than Slack," Maren replied. "I need one thing." Quinn didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was sharper. "If this is about getting back in, don't. They'll call it malicious intent." "It's not about getting back in," Maren Sloan said, steady. "It's about proving I wasn't in." Silence again. Then, Quinn said, "What did they accuse you of?" "Unauthorized extraction at 9:47 p.m. yesterday," Maren said. "From my account." Quinn didn't laugh. He didn't gasp. He didn't comfort her. He said the one sentence that sounded like a door unlocking. "That time is specific." "That time is stupid," Maren Sloan whispered, and she let herself feel it for half a second, the insult of being framed by someone who thought she wouldn't fight back. Quinn's tone shifted, quieter. "I can't pull internal logs for you. That's career-ending." "I'm not asking for internal logs," Maren said. "I'm asking you a hypothetical question." Quinn made a small noise, like he already knew where this was going. "Okay," he said. "Hypothetical. If someone used my credentials," Maren Sloan said, "what would they have to touch that leaves a mark somewhere else?" "Something outside the compliance system." Quinn hesitated. Then he said, "Single sign-on." Maren didn't move. "SSO events leave trails," Quinn continued. "Not just in the app, in identity, in session tokens, in device fingerprints." "Device fingerprints," Maren Sloan repeated, tasting the words like metal. Quinn lowered his voice further. "And there's something else." "What?" Quinn said, "Door access logs." Maren Sloan stared forward through her windshield. People crossed the sidewalk. A woman carried a coffee like it was a ritual. "You mean badge swipes?" Maren asked. "Badge swipes, elevator calls, visitor pass issuance," Quinn said. Physical entry correlates with login patterns. If your account was used at 9:47 p.m., whoever did it probably wasn't thinking about the building. Marin felt her mind sharpen into a thin, bright line. Calvin had built a narrative with software, but the world still had doors, and doors had memories. At 8:17 a.m., Marin Sloan opened her email app again, not because she expected mercy from the company, but because she expected bureaucracy from vendors. Corporate life ran on third parties. Calendars, payroll, facilities, expense reports, IT ticketing. And the thing about third parties was this: they didn't erase you when your boss wanted to. They erased you when the contract said so. She searched her inbox for one phrase: facilities ticket. Hundreds. She narrowed. Visitor. Then there it was. A thread from 3 months ago, when she'd requested a weekend access exception for a vendor audit. The vendor's name hit her like a key in the right lock. Brighthall Security Services. They ran the building's access platform. They weren't Calvin's. They were contracted, and contracts came with retention policies. At 8:21 a.m., Marin Sloan clicked into her sent mail and found an old signature block from a Brighthall account manager. Name: Lenora Fitch. Role: Client Success. Client Success. The job title that meant, I will solve your problem if it helps me keep my account. Marin copied the email address into a new message. She stared at the blank subject line. Then she typed, Urgent. Access audit question. Retention policy. No drama. No accusations. Just corporate language sharp enough to cut. At 8:23 a.m., Marin Sloan wrote like she'd been trained by the same world that was trying to crush her. Hi, Lenora. I'm reaching out with an urgent question regarding our building access logs and retention policy for visitor passes and after-hours entry events. I'm currently verifying timestamps related to an internal compliance matter. Can you confirm what access event data is retained and how quickly it can be exported for verification? She didn't mention Calvin. She didn't mention HR. She didn't mention the word framed, because the moment you act like a victim, corporate systems treat you like one. Marin Sloan hit send. Then she waited exactly 7 seconds. At 8:24 a.m., she sent a second email, same thread, one line. Happy to jump on a quick call today. Then she did something most people forget they can do. She opened LinkedIn. And she searched Lenora Fitch. Lenora existed. Lenora had a profile photo with the kind of smile that suggested she was good at making angry clients feel understood. And under her profile, a detail glowed like a match. Typically responds within 1 hour. Marin Sloan smiled once. Then let's not waste your brand promise, she murmured. At 8:32 a.m., Marin Sloan drove to a nearby cafe and chose a seat with her back to the wall. Old habit, new necessity. She opened her laptop. Not her work laptop. That one was radioactive now. Her personal machine, clean and quiet. She created a folder and named it Ghost Log. Then she began building a timeline. Not from memory, from receipts. The way you build truth when everyone around you is selling stories. At 8:41 a.m., she pulled up her rideshare history. There it was last night. Pickup time. Drop-off time. The route across the Aurora Bridge. Her timestamp at 9:47 p.m. was not a data extraction. It was her car moving through rain. She screenshotted it. Saved it. Then she opened her phone's battery log. Her phone had died at 9:39 p.m. That wasn't a poetic detail. That was a weapon. She saved that too. At 8:49 a.m., her laptop chimed with an incoming email. Brighthall. Lenora. Faster than a lie could settle. Hi Marin, yes. Our platform retains access events for 12 months by default for your building. Visitor pass issuance and after-hours access requests are included. Export requests typically need approval from the client admin, but we can provide a retention confirmation immediately. Marin Sloan reread that line. Export requests need approval from the client admin. Calvin. Of course. He'd control the faucet. He'd starve her of evidence. Unless she used a different approach. At 8:52 a.m., Marin replied with calm pressure. Thanks, Lenora. I'm not requesting the export yet. I need confirmation that the data exists and is immutable once recorded, specifically visitor badge issuance logs and entry events. Lenora responded 2 minutes later, as if she was enjoying being useful. Yes, once recorded, events are immutable. Admin users can add notes, but cannot delete raw events in the audit stream. Marin Sloan leaned back. There it was. A wall Calvin couldn't quietly repaint. Immutable. At 8:58 a.m., Marin wrote Quinn again. Not a request. A single sentence. If someone logged in as me at 9:47 p.m., can SSO show device fingerprint and approximate location? Quinn didn't reply right away. So Marin did what she always did when systems weren't responding. She kept moving. At 9:03 a.m., she opened her calendar. Not the company one. They'd cut that cord. Her personal calendar, where she'd always mirrored key work meetings because she liked control. Audit prep day. She found the meeting. Pre-audit review risk ledger. It was scheduled for this morning. Calvin, Dana, legal, and the invite notes included a line she'd typed herself last week. Marin presenting findings. Marin Sloan stared at her own words. A small thing, but it proved intent. She wasn't planning theft. She was planning transparency. At 9:11 a.m., her phone buzzed again. A new text from the same unknown number. One line this time. You don't have all day. Marin Sloan didn't respond. She didn't block it. She screenshotted it and saved it into GHOst log. Because threats were also evidence, if you were patient enough to treat them like data. At 9:18 a.m., Quinn finally replied. SSO can show device ID hash, IP range, and user agent. But only identity admins can export. Calvin can. Maybe legal can, not you. Marin Sloan typed back. Hypothetically, can it be viewed without exporting? Quinn. Sometimes. Depends on tooling. But there's always a trace. Marin held that sentence carefully. There's always a trace. Corporate criminals believed they were invisible because they were wearing policy. But policy itself created logs. At 9:27 a.m., Marin Sloan opened another vendor portal. Expense management. Her corporate card had been cut off. She knew that. But she didn't need spending power. She needed timestamps. She logged in. Denied. Okay. She opened her bank app instead. She searched for one thing. That rideshare charge. There it was. Pending. Time-stamped. She saved it. Then she created a PDF with all the screenshots. Rideshare route, battery log, bank pending charge, threatening text. She named it. Marin Sloan 9:47 p.m. Timeline. PDF. At 9:39 a.m., she called someone else. Not inside the company. Not a friend. A lawyer. Because a corporation loved one thing more than profit. Control. And the only thing that threatened corporate control was a clean legal record. She found a boutique employment attorney in Seattle who specialized in retaliation and whistleblower protections. She didn't choose the loudest firm. She chose the one with reviews that repeated a phrase over and over. Strategic. At 9:43 a.m., the attorney's assistant answered. Marin Sloan said, I need a consultation today. I'm on administrative leave for alleged data theft. I believe it's retaliation tied to an internal compliance report. The assistant's voice sharpened. Can you email a timeline? Marin smiled without warmth. I can email you a timeline with receipts, she said. At 9:47 a.m., Marin Sloan hit send. Not to the company. To someone who would preserve her story in a format Calvin couldn't edit. At 9:53 a.m., she received an email back. Consult scheduled for later today. Good. But revenge wasn't just survival. Revenge was symmetry. Calvin used process against her. So she would use process against Calvin. At 10:02 a.m., Marin Sloan opened one more thread in her inbox. A quiet one. A personal email from months ago, forwarded from her work address, back when she still had access. Subject. Onboarding admin privileges. Confirmation. She'd forwarded it to herself as a reminder for a future audit. Because she had always been the kind of person who prepared for the day someone tried to rewrite history. She opened the email, and there it was. A list of admin roles for the compliance tools. Names included. One name sat at the top like a crown. Calvin Rusk, Super Admin. Marin Sloan exhaled slowly. Super Admin meant power. And power always meant opportunity. Because if Calvin was Super Admin, He could create sessions. He could revoke sessions. He could impersonate workflows. But he couldn't break physics. He couldn't be in two places at once. He couldn't make immutable logs disappear. And he couldn't stop someone from noticing patterns if the right people started looking. At 10:14 a.m., Marin wrote a third email to Lenora at Brighthall, not asking for an export, asking for a confirmation letter. A document. Something official. Lenora, could you provide a signed letter on Brighthall letterhead, confirming 1. Retention length, 2. Immutability of raw access events, and 3. That visitor pass issuance and after-hours access events are recorded in the audit stream. She hit send and sipped her coffee. It tasted like adult fear, and she swallowed it anyway. At 10:29 a.m., Lenora replied, "Yes, I can provide that today." Marin Sloan didn't celebrate. She just added a new line to her notes. Brighthall letter equals locked door. At 10:41 a.m., a memory surfaced that made her sit up straighter. Last month, Calvin had insisted on moving the compliance team's desks, a culture alignment initiative. He said he wanted the team closer. He said he wanted more collaboration. But what he really wanted was sightlines. He'd placed Marin Sloan at a desk visible from his office, so he could watch her, so he could manage her, so he could anticipate, which meant Calvin had been thinking about her as a threat for a long time. Not since yesterday. Not since 9:47 p.m. This was older. This was planned. At 10:57 a.m., Marin felt the story shift inside her from shock to pattern. And pattern was where she was strongest. Because pattern was how she built the risk ledger in the first place. At 11:05 a.m., she opened a blank document and titled it, "How to Catch a Clean Liar." Then she wrote, 1. Don't argue with their story. 2. Build a parallel timeline. 3. Use third parties. 4. Force them into contradictions. 5. Make your revenge look like governance. At 11:12 a.m., her phone buzzed. Lenora sent the letter as a PDF attachment. Brighthall letterhead. Signature. Immutability. Retention. Visitor pass logs included. It wasn't the log itself, but it was proof the log existed. And in the legal world, existence was oxygen. Marin Sloan saved it into Ghost Log and renamed it Brighthall Immutable, Access, Confirmation, PDF. Then she stared at her folder. It had weight now. It had shape. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the foundation for something worse for them, because evidence didn't need to shout. Evidence just needed to survive long enough to be seen. At 11:26 a.m., Marin Sloan received one more email from a sender she didn't recognize. No company signature, no logo, just a Gmail address. Subject: You were right. Her pulse didn't spike. It tightened. She opened it. 3 sentences. I saw what they did. Calvin asked me to pull something last night. I'm sorry. No name. No confession. Just a crack in the wall. And cracks meant pressure had started building on their side. At 11:30 a.m., Marin Sloan typed back one line. If you want to help, tell me one fact you can't take back. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She offered the only thing people really want when they've done something wrong. A chance to be useful again. At 11:34 a.m., a reply came. One sentence. At 9:31 p.m., Calvin was still in the office. Marin Sloan froze. Because if Calvin was in the office at 9:31 p.m., then he had access to systems, terminals, network paths, physical presence. And if her account was used at 9:47 p.m., he didn't need to be a hacker. He just needed to be a man with admin power and time. At 11:38 a.m., Marin Sloan saved the email. Then she whispered, to no one, "Thank you." Not because she was grateful, because she was ready. Because this wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. This was about a man who believed he could weaponize truth and still call himself trust and compliance. And Marin Sloan had decided something that felt almost sacred. If Calvin wanted to make her the story, she would make him the case study, and she would do it in the cleanest way possible, through the very systems he worshipped. This part teaches us something important. When power lies, it lies in systems. So truth has to be rebuilt outside those systems. Receipts don't argue. They just wait to be seen. At 12:08 p.m., Maren Sloan sat across from her attorney in a narrow office that smelled faintly of paper and burnt coffee. The attorney's name was Rachel Ivers. She didn't smile to be kind. She smiled to signal precision. "Tell me what you want," Rachel said, fingers laced, voice even. "Not what you feel. What outcome?" Maren Sloan didn't hesitate. "I want my name cleared," she said. "And I want the truth to surface in a way that doesn't look like revenge." Rachel nodded once. "Good. Because revenge is loud. Compliance is lethal." Rachel slid a legal pad forward and wrote one phrase at the top. "Procedural necessity. This," she said, tapping the page, "is how companies hang themselves without realizing they're standing on a chair." At 12:11 p.m., Rachel continued. "You don't ask for logs," she said. "You ask for confirmation of process." Maren leaned in slightly. "Explain." Rachel flipped the page. "Right now, they control the narrative. If you demand SSO logs or door access, they'll say investigation privilege." She wrote a second phrase, "Internal consistency check." "You don't ask for evidence," Rachel said. "You ask whether their own steps align." Maren Sloan felt it click. "You force them to explain themselves," she said. Rachel smiled again. "You force them to explain themselves in writing." At 12:15 p.m., Rachel opened her laptop and pulled up a blank email template. "This email," she said, "will not accuse. It will not threaten. It will not mention whistleblowing." She paused. "It will look boring." Boring, Maren Sloan realized, was the most dangerous thing in corporate life. Rachel dictated slowly. Subject line: Clarification on investigation scope and timeline. She looked at Marin. "You send it to HR. CC Legal. CC Calvin." Calvin. The name sat in the air like dust. Rachel continued. "You ask 3 questions." "Only 3," she typed. 1. Can you confirm the exact start time of the investigation into alleged unauthorized access? 2. Can you confirm whether system access was revoked before or after this start time? 3. Can you confirm which systems are considered in scope for determining access and attribution? Rachel stopped typing. "That's it?" Maren asked. "That's the trap," Rachel replied. At 12:19 p.m., Maren Sloan stared at the screen. Rachel leaned back. "Here's why it works." She raised one finger. "If they say the investigation started before your access was revoked, they admit they didn't preserve evidence." Second finger. "If they say it started after, they admit access was revoked without cause." Third finger. "And if they list systems," Rachel said, "and they don't include door access or identity logs, you ask why." Rachel closed the laptop softly. "They either contradict themselves," she said, "or they expand scope." "And expanded scope," Maren Sloan said quietly, "means third-party logs." Rachel nodded. "Which you already know exist." At 12:22 p.m., Maren Sloan felt something shift. This wasn't confrontation. This was architecture. Rachel slid another document across the table. "A preservation notice," she said. "If they try to delete anything after this, they're in trouble." Maren read the header, "Notice of duty to preserve potentially relevant information." "Send this 5 minutes after the email," Rachel said. "Timing matters." At 12:28 p.m., Maren Sloan left the office and stepped into daylight that felt undeserved. She walked 3 blocks without checking her phone, because patience was now part of the weapon. At 12:41 p.m., she sat back down in the cafe, opened her laptop, and copied Rachel's words exactly. No emotion, no adjectives, just clean questions. She addressed it. Dana People Operations. Legal Counsel. Calvin Rusk. She read it once. Twice. Then she sent it. At 12:43 p.m., the email left her outbox. The clean request. At 12:48 p.m., she sent the preservation notice. 5 minutes. Exactly. Then she closed her laptop. Because once a system was forced to respond, interference only made noise. At 1:06 p.m., her phone buzzed. An email notification from Dana. Subject: Clarification on investigation scope and timeline. Maren Sloan didn't open it right away. She counted to 10. Then she tapped. Dana's email was careful. Too careful. "Hi Marin. The investigation began upon identification of anomalous access behavior. System access was revoked shortly thereafter as a precautionary measure. In-scope systems include application-level access logs relevant to the incident. Application level. Not identity. Not physical. Maren Sloan smiled. Because that omission was not an accident. It was a tell. At 1:11 p.m., a second email arrived. From legal. Longer. Colder. We believe the current scope is sufficient to determine attribution. Expansion at this stage is not warranted. Maren read that line twice. Not warranted. Corporate 4. Please stop asking. At 1:14 p.m., a third email landed. From Calvin. No greeting. Just one sentence. Maren, let's discuss this offline. Offline. Where? Nothing was recorded. Where power lived. Where truth went to die. Maren Sloan did not reply. At 1:17 p.m., she forwarded all 3 emails to Rachel. Subject line. They bit. Rachel replied 3 minutes later. Good. Now we escalate without raising our voice. At 1:22 p.m., Rachel sent Maren a revised draft. 1 additional email. Same recipients. Same calm tone. 1 new question added at the end. Additionally, can you confirm whether physical access data and identity provider session metadata were excluded intentionally? And if so, the rationale for exclusion? Rationale. The most dangerous word in corporate America. Because rationale had to make sense. At 1:25 p.m., Maren Sloan sent the follow-up. Then she waited. At 1:41 p.m., silence. At 2:03 p.m., still nothing. At 2:19 p.m., her phone buzzed, not an email. A call. Calvin. Maren Sloan let it ring. Once. Twice. She didn't decline. She didn't answer. She let it stop on its own. Because unanswered calls created records too. At 2:27 p.m., an email finally arrived. From legal. Shorter this time. Sharper. We are reviewing your request and will revert. Revert. A word that meant time. Time was the last thing Calvin had. Because the moment legal reviewed, they would ask why identity logs weren't included. They would ask why physical access wasn't considered. They would ask, who decided scope? And that question always had a name attached to it. At 2:36 p.m., Maren Sloan opened her GHO-STAL-OG folder. She added a new subfolder, Clean Request. Inside it, she saved Original Clarification Email. After Preservation Notice. All responses. Call log from Calvin. Then, she did something quiet. She wrote a memo. Not to send. To prepare. Title. Consistency gaps. She listed them calmly. Investigation start time, undefined. Access revoked without timestamp clarity. Scope excludes identity and physical access. Admin level conflict of interest unaddressed. No adjectives. No conclusions. Just gaps. At 2:58 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A text. You're making this worse. Maren Sloan screenshotted it. Saved it. Did not reply. Because worse for whom was the real question. At 3:11 p.m., Rachel emailed again. Legal will either expand scope or isolate Calvin. Either way, they're moving. Maren Sloan leaned back. For the first time all day, she let herself breathe. Not relief. Alignment. Because the system was now doing what systems always did when pressed correctly. It began protecting itself. And Calvin Rusk was suddenly less important than liability. At 3:24 p.m., Maren Sloan looked out the cafe window. People walked by, unaware that inside a glass office tower nearby, a man was realizing something too late. That the cleanest traps didn't snap shut. They stayed open. And invited you to step forward. At 3:31 p.m., Maren Sloan received one final email for the day. From legal. Effective immediately. The investigation scope is being expanded to include identity provider session metadata and physical access records. Further communication to follow. She read it once, then closed her laptop because the door had opened, and once door logs were in play, 9:47 p.m. was about to stop being her problem and start being Calvin's. Here's what most people get wrong. You don't beat a corporation by fighting it. You let it explain itself. And when a system is forced to speak clearly, its contradictions do the damage for you. At 8:02 a.m., Maren Sloan woke before her alarm, the way people do when their mind has already decided today matters. She didn't reach for her phone right away. She listened. The city outside her window hummed with the sound of people who believed their lives were stable. She let that thought pass. Then she checked her inbox. 3 new emails. All from legal. The first one changed everything. At 8:05 a.m., Maren Sloan read the sentence slowly, like it might rearrange itself if she rushed. Please be advised that physical access records and identity provider session metadata are now under review. Under review. That meant someone had opened the door Calvin had tried to keep closed. She didn't smile. Not yet. Because systems didn't lie. They just spoke in different languages. And today was the day those languages started translating each other. At 8:12 a.m., Maren Sloan joined a Zoom call she wasn't technically invited to, but was legally allowed to observe. Camera off. Mic muted. Legal counsel spoke first. We're aligning timelines, he said. Please walk us through last night. Calvin's voice came next. Smooth. Controlled. Too steady. I left the office around 9:15 p.m., Calvin said. After reviewing some materials. Maren Sloan tilted her head slightly, because she already knew that wasn't true. At 8:16 a.m., legal asked, and to confirm, you did not access compliance systems after leaving the building? Correct, Calvin said. Absolutely not. 2 lies. Clean. Confident. Documented. At 8:18 a.m., a different voice joined the call. Facilities. The man introduced himself like a footnote. I'm here to answer questions regarding access logs. Legal cleared his throat. Can you confirm the last recorded physical access for Calvin Rusk yesterday? A pause. Keys clicking. Then, at 9:42 p.m., badge exit recorded. Calvin Rusk exited through the north garage. Maren Sloan closed her eyes. Because lies hated minutes. Minutes were specific. Calvin had said 9:15 p.m. The building said 9:42 p.m. That gap wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intent. At 8:22 a.m., legal spoke again. And prior to that exit, were there any other access events? Yes, facilities said. Elevator usage at 9:31 p.m. From executive floor to compliance level. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Dangerous quiet. At 8:24 a.m., legal turned the conversation. Now let's align identity logs, he said. Can identity walk us through session activity tied to Maren Sloan's account? Another voice. Identity provider admin. Calm. Precisi. At 9:47 p.m., a session token associated with Maren Sloan's account initiated an export action. Calvin inhaled audibly. Just once. At 8:27 a.m., legal asked the question that mattered. What device fingerprint initiated that session? Keys again. Then, unknown corporate device, identity said. But not Maren Sloan's registered laptop. A pause. And the IP? Internal network. On-site. On-site. The word landed like a verdict. At 8:29 a.m., Maren Sloan opened her ghost log folder. She added one line under her memo. Identity session originated on-site at 9:47 p.m. Calvin hadn't left. He couldn't have, because the system said he was still inside. At 8:31 a.m., legal continued, voice now sharpened. Can identity confirm if any admin-level impersonation or delegated session features exist? Another pause. Yes, the admin said. Superadmins can initiate delegated workflows. Silence. Then legal asked quietly, who holds superadmin privileges? The admin answered, Calvin Rusk. At 8:34 a.m., no one spoke, not because they were confused, but because the story had finished telling itself. At 8:36 a.m., Calvin tried to recover. There may be an explanation, he said. This could be a system anomaly. Facilities responded before legal could. Our logs are immutable, the facilities rep said. There are no anomalies recorded. Identity added. Same for session metadata. Immutable. The word came back like a mirror. At 8:39 a.m., legal spoke one final time. Calvin, we will need you to step off the call. A pause. Then a click. Calvin disappeared. At 8:41 a.m., Maren Sloan sat perfectly still. Because this wasn't victory. This was exposure. And exposure always came before collapse. At 8:47 a.m., legal addressed the remaining participants. We will be documenting findings and notifying executive leadership. Then, after a beat, Marin, thank you for your patience. Patience. Another word that sounded harmless. But Marin Sloan knew what it meant in corporate language. You survived long enough for the truth to matter. At 9:02 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from the unknown number. One line. We didn't think you'd get this far. Marin Sloan typed back for the first time. I didn't think you'd be this sloppy. She didn't wait for a response, because the systems had already responded for her. At 9:11 a.m., an email arrived. Subject: Administrative leave update. Her access was not restored yet. But something more important was there. Allegations regarding unauthorized access tied to Marin Sloan are no longer substantiated. No apology. No warmth. But the sentence stood. At 9:18 a.m., Marin Sloan closed her laptop. She stood by the window again. Outside, the city moved. Inside, a man was packing his office without understanding how the building itself had testified against him. She whispered something she hadn't planned to say. Thank you. Not to legal. Not to facilities. Not even to the anonymous source. She thanked the systems. Because they remembered what people tried to forget. And now, the story was no longer about 9:47 p.m. It was about 9:42 p.m. About an elevator ride. About a badge swipe. About a man who thought power made him invisible. It didn't. It made him traceable. Power believes it's invisible. But systems remember everything. Timestamps. Doors. Sessions. And sooner or later, the truth isn't emotional. It's mathematical. At 10:04 a.m., Marin Sloan received the email that companies send when they want to sound generous without admitting fault. Subject: Next steps. No greeting. No apology. Just movement. She opened it. Following the conclusion of the investigation, we would like to discuss reinstatement options and a potential role realignment. Role realignment. Corporate 4. Please don't sue us. At 10:06 a.m., Marin Sloan closed the email and didn't answer. Because timing was leverage. And leverage only worked when you didn't rush to spend it. At 10:21 a.m., Rachel Ivers called. They're scared, Rachel said without preamble. Which means they're about to offer you something that looks big and costs them very little. What do they think costs them a lot? Marin asked. Rachel paused. Admitting they failed you. At 10:24 a.m., Marin Sloan stared at the city outside her window again. She remembered something Calvin once said in a meeting, months ago, when she'd questioned a rushed rollout. Perfection slows innovation. At the time, everyone nodded. Now she understood what he'd meant. Perfection slowed lying. At 10:31 a.m., another email arrived. This one from Dana in People Operations. Hi, Marin. Leadership would love to meet today at 3:30 p.m. to discuss a path forward. Leadership would love. As if love had ever entered the room. Marin Sloan replied with one line. Please confirm the agenda. At Zech. Trezich, she schappte. Rachel texted her. Good. At 11:02 a.m., the agenda came back. Reinstatement. New role scope. Compensation adjustment. Forward-looking alignment. Notably missing. Accountability. Apology. Calvin Rusk. At 11:11 a.m., Marin Sloan opened her Coast log folder one last time and read through it slowly. Not because she needed to remember what happened, but because she needed to remember who she had become. She wasn't the woman who needed permission to speak anymore. She was the woman who had forced systems to speak. At 12:09 p.m., she walked back into the building for the first time since the badge turned red. This time, the gate opened. Green light. No sound. No fanfare. Just access. The guard nodded like nothing had ever happened. Which was exactly how companies liked it. At 12:14 p.m., Marin Sloan stepped into a conference room that had been chosen carefully. Executive floor. Glass walls. A view that suggested authority without responsibility. 4 people waited. The general counsel. The head of HR. An SVP she'd barely interacted with before. And a man she didn't recognize, introduced as interim compliance leadership. Calvin's chair was empty. That was intentional. At 12:17 p.m., the general counsel smiled. Marin, thank you for coming in. Marin Sloan sat without returning the smile. You've reviewed the findings? She asked. The SVP nodded. We have. And? Marin said. The SVP chose his words like they'd been polished by committee. The investigation concluded that actions were taken that did not align with our values. Values. The safest word in corporate language. Not facts. Not names. Values. At 12:20 p.m., the head of HR leaned forward. We want you to know how much we appreciate your professionalism throughout this process. Marin Sloan didn't react, because professionalism was what people praised when they wanted you to forget the harm. At 12:22 p.m., the interim compliance leader spoke. We'd like to offer you a new role, he said. Director of Ethical Systems Oversight. The title landed heavily. It sounded important. It sounded powerful. It sounded like a reward. And it sounded like a leash. You would report directly to legal, he continued, with expanded authority. Marin Sloan asked one question. Will I have independence? The general counsel smiled again. You'll have support. That wasn't the same thing. At 12:25 p.m., the SVP added, there would also be a compensation adjustment. He slid a document across the table. The number was generous. Intentionally so. Marin Sloan looked at it. Then she pushed it back. I'm not here to negotiate my silence, she said calmly. The room stiffened. At 12:27 p.m., the general counsel cleared his throat. No one is suggesting. I am, Marin said. Because if I accept this role without conditions, that's exactly what it becomes. Silence. The wrong kind. At 12:29 p.m., Marin Sloan continued. I want 3 things. Rachel's voice echoed in her head. Say it clean. 1, Marin said. A written finding that clears my name publicly within the company. The general counsel nodded slowly. 2, she continued. A formal review of delegated admin privileges across compliance systems, with third-party oversight. The interim leader shifted in his seat. 3, Marin Sloan said, voice steady. I do not report to legal. I report to the board's risk committee. The room changed temperature. At 12:33 p.m., the SVP leaned back. That's unconventional. So was framing me, Marin replied. No anger, no heat. Just symmetry. At 12:36 p.m., the general counsel folded his hands. We'll need time to consider. Marin Sloan stood. You have until end of day, she said. Because tomorrow my attorney begins formal disclosure. She didn't threaten. She stated. Sequence. At 12:38 p.m., she left the room. This time, no one tried to stop her. At 1:07 p.m., she received a message from Rachel. They're scrambling. At 2:11 p.m., an email from the general counsel arrived. Subject, re. Next steps. They agreed to all 3 conditions. All of them. At 2:18 p.m., Marin Sloan closed her eyes briefly. Not in relief. In recognition. Because this wasn't victory. This was alignment with her own spine. At 2:41 p.m., she replied with one sentence. I accept, effective tomorrow. At 3:02 p.m., another message came through. From an internal alias. No signature. Just one line. Calvin resigned. Marin Sloan stared at the words. She didn't feel joy. She felt closure. Because the point had never been to destroy him. The point had been to stop him. At 3:19 p.m., she walked out of the building again. Badge clipped. Access restored. But something was different now. She wasn't returning to who she was. She was stepping into who the system had accidentally revealed her to be. Someone who couldn't be erased quietly. At 3:34 p.m., Marin Sloan paused on the sidewalk and opened her notes app. She added one final line under her list. Revenge doesn't always look like punishment. Then she typed the last sentence. Sometimes it looks like governance done right. She locked her phone and walked forward, not because the company had changed, but because she had. This is where most people lose, not when they're attacked, but when they're offered comfort in exchange for silence. Real power isn't taking the deal. It's defining the terms. At 6:48 a.m., Marin Sloan unlocked her office before anyone else arrived, not because she had to, because she liked the building when it told the truth. Morning light slid across the glass walls, revealing fingerprints no one ever noticed during the day. The kind of marks that proved people had been here, touching things, leaning on things, believing they were unseen. Marin Sloane set her bag down and didn't turn on the overhead lights. She preferred shadows when she was thinking. At 6:53 a.m., she opened the dashboard that now belonged to her. Not the risk ledger she'd built before. A new one, cleaner, sharper, designed with one rule written into its architecture. No single human gets to decide what disappears. At 7:01 a.m., the first automated report of the day populated the screen. No alerts. No anomalies. No quiet damage hiding behind green checkmarks. That was new. Before, silence had meant someone was smoothing things over. Now silence meant the system was breathing evenly. At 7:08 a.m., an email came in from the board's risk committee. 3 lines. Reviewed the overnight audit. Appreciate the transparency. Proceed. No praise. No congratulations. Just trust earned the hard way. Marin Sloane closed the email. She didn't need validation anymore. At 7:14 a.m., footsteps echoed in the hallway. The interim compliance lead now permanent paused at her door. Morning, he said. Morning, Marin replied. He hesitated. They're using your framework in 2 other divisions. She nodded. Good. That's all you have to say? Marin Sloane looked up at him. Systems that work don't need applause, she said. He smiled, unsure if he was being dismissed or taught something. At 7:26 a.m., he left. At 7:31 a.m., Marin stood and walked to the window. The city below moved the way it always had, fast, hungry, convinced it was running out of time. She remembered the version of herself who thought survival meant being agreeable. She remembered the red light at the badge gate. She remembered 9:47 p.m., a time that had tried to define her. Now it was just a timestamp in a closed case. At 7:44 a.m., her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Quarterly ethics review. She smiled, not because it was satisfying, because it was boring. And boring was what safety looked like when it lasted. At 8:02 a.m., the building filled with voices. Meetings began. Decisions layered on top of decisions. Somewhere, someone would try to cut a corner. They always did. But now, the corner would remember. At 8:19 a.m., Marin Sloane opened a blank document. Not a report. A note to herself. She typed slowly. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I stayed clean long enough for the truth to surface. She saved it. Not to the company drive. To her own. At 8:33 a.m., an internal memo went out company-wide. No drama. No story. Just a line near the end. Unauthorized actions taken during the prior investigation were inconsistent with company standards. Corrective measures have been implemented. No names. No spectacle. But everyone understood. At 8:47 a.m., Marin closed her laptop. She stood. She adjusted her blazer. Not armor anymore. Just clothing. Before leaving the office, she looked once more at the dashboard. Everything was green. Not because nothing bad was happening, but because nothing bad was being hidden. At 9:02 a.m., Marin Sloane stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind her. Soft. Final. The kind of sound that doesn't echo. She walked forward, not faster, not slower, just steady, because revenge had never been the point. The point was this: when the noise faded, when the liars left, when the systems were forced to remember, what stayed clean? Was her name? Revenge doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes, it looks like restraint. Like staying clean long enough for the truth to matter. Because when the noise fades, what stays with you is your name. Power rarely attacks you directly. Real power doesn't confront you. It edits you out. It removes your access. It rewrites the story quietly. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already defending yourself instead of the truth. Truth doesn't need drama. It needs time. Truth doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be believed. It survives. It waits in logs, timestamps, and forgotten records. And when everything else collapses, it's the only thing still standing. The system protects itself, not you. Companies don't defend people. They defend stability. They defend liability. And when forced to choose, they will always sacrifice the individual before the structure. Silence is the most expensive currency. There will always be an offer. More money, a better title, a quieter life. All in exchange for one thing: your silence. Integrity is not loud. It's durable. Integrity doesn't win fast. It doesn't trend. It doesn't clap back. But it lasts. And when the noise fades, it's the only thing that can't be erased. Because in the end, revenge isn't about punishment. It's about staying clean long enough for the truth to matter.